The crowd's jeers hung in the air like the suffocating dust of the Arizona summer as Mariah Kennedy clutched her 6-month-old daughter to her chest, shielding the infant's face from both the scorching sun and the hateful stares of the townsfolk. Sierra Vista had once been her home, but today in 1874 it felt more like a gallows. Shameless harlot. Mrs. Whittaker, the banker's wife, spat as Mariah hurried past, her worn boots catching on the uneven wooden sidewalk. Taking up with men while your husband was away fighting Indians. And now parading that bastard child through our decent town. Mariah kept her head high though tears threatened. The accusations stung all the more for their falsehood. Her husband Thomas hadn't died fighting. He'd perished in a mining accident 2 towns over where he'd gone seeking work. She'd received the news 3 months after his departure, and 1 month after discovering she carried his child. By then, the rumors had already begun, whispers that the baby couldn't possibly be Thomas's, that Mariah must have been unfaithful. The council's decision is final, Mayor Patterson announced from the steps of the town hall, his voice carrying across the main street where a small crowd had gathered. Mariah Kennedy, for your moral transgressions and the shame you've brought upon Sierra Vista, you are hereby ordered to leave town limits by sundown. Should you return, you'll face imprisonment. Mariah clutched little Emma tighter, the baby fussing against her mother's rigid embrace. They couldn't do this, cast out a widow and her child based on nothing but spiteful gossip. But the determined set of the mayor's jowls told her protests would fall on deaf ears. Besides, she had nowhere to turn. Her parents had passed years ago, and her only sister lived in San Francisco, too far to reach with no money and a baby. I need time to gather my things, she managed, her voice smaller than she'd intended. You'll take what you can carry and be gone by sunset, the mayor replied coldly. The crowd parted as she moved toward her small rented room above the milliner's shop. Some looked away in feigned propriety, others stared openly with judgment or morbid fascination. These were people who had greeted her daily for 5 years, people who had attended her wedding, people who had offered condolences when news of Thomas's death reached town. Now they stood silent as she was cast out. Wait just a minute. The deep voice cut through the murmuring crowd. Boots thudded heavily on the packed dirt as a tall figure pushed through the onlookers. Mariah turned to see a man she recognized only vaguely, one of the cowboys who occasionally rode in with the cattle drives. His tan hat was pulled low, but she could see the hard set of his jaw, the tension in his broad shoulders as he positioned himself between her and the mayor. "This ain't right, and you all know it," he said, his voice carrying the weight of righteous anger. His eyes, blue as a summer sky, swept the crowd before returning to Mariah. Without warning, he reached out and took her by the arm, gentle but firm. "Not alone," he said quietly, just for her to hear. Then louder to the assembly, "Mrs. Kennedy and her child won't be leaving without proper provisions and transportation, and they certainly won't be traveling unaccompanied through Apache territory." Mayor Patterson's face reddened. "This isn't your affair, Quinn. The decision's been made." "The name's Jacob Quinn," the cowboy replied evenly, "and I'm making it my affair. Last I checked, America was a place of justice. Where's the justice in sending a mother and infant into the desert to die?" A few murmurs of assent rippled through the crowd. Mariah stood frozen, the unexpected defense rendering her speechless. "You defending her morals, Quinn?" someone called out. Jacob's gaze didn't waver. "I'm defending basic human decency, something seemingly in short supply today." He turned to Mariah, his voice softening. "Madam, if you'll allow me, I'd like to escort you and your little one to my ranch until you can make proper arrangements." Mariah stared at this stranger who had suddenly become her only ally. Pride warred with desperation. Emma whimpered, as if sensing her mother's distress. "Why would you help us?" she whispered. Something passed across Jacob's face, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. "Because it's the right thing to do." With the entire town watching, Mariah straightened her spine and nodded once. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn." "Jacob," he corrected, a small smile touching his lips. "Let's get your things." As they moved toward the milliner's shop, the crowd reluctantly parted. Jacob's hand remained steady on her arm, a silent promise that whatever came next, she would face it with at least one person standing beside her. The room Mariah had called home was barely large enough for the narrow bed, a small table, and the cradle Thomas had crafted before leaving. Jacob waited respectfully by the door as she gathered her meager possessions, a change of clothes for herself and Emma, Thomas's pocket watch, a locket containing a lock of her mother's hair, and the Bible her parents had given her on her wedding day. "Is this everything?" Jacob asked, his voice gentler than she would have expected from a man of his stature. Mariah nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "We traveled light when we came here. Seems fitting we leave the same way." Without comment, Jacob took her small carpet bag. "My horse is hitched outside the saloon. I'll see about borrowing a wagon." Within the hour, Jacob had secured a small wagon from the livery. The stable owner, Mr. Dawson, had always been kind to Mariah, and despite the council's decision, he pressed a small bag of provisions into her hands. "Can't have you going hungry," he muttered, avoiding her eyes. "And this is for the little one." He slipped a tiny wooden horse into her palm. "Carved it myself." "Thank you," Mariah whispered, touched by this small kindness amid so much cruelty. Jacob helped her into the wagon, ensuring she and Emma were settled before taking the reins. As they pulled away from Sierra Vista, Mariah refused to look back. She'd given 5 years of her life to this town, only to be cast out based on lies and suspicion. Whatever lay ahead couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving in the late afternoon sun. Emma had finally settled against Mariah's chest, lulled by the steady rocking of the wagon. Jacob drove in silence, occasionally glancing over to ensure they were comfortable. "Your ranch," Mariah ventured after nearly an hour of quiet travel. "Is it far?" "About 3 hours' ride," Jacob replied, "near the foothills." "It's not much, but there's a spare room that'll be yours for as long as you need it." "I don't understand why you're doing this." Jacob's hands tightened on the reins. "My sister was in a similar situation once. Town turned against her when her husband abandoned her while she was carrying. No one stood up for her then." His jaw clenched. "I wasn't there. I was working a cattle drive-up in Wyoming. By the time I returned, she and the baby were gone." "I'm so sorry," Mariah murmured. "Found out later she tried to make it to Tucson. Never arrived." His voice was flat, masking old grief. "So when I saw what was happening to you, well, I couldn't stand by. Not again." The simple honesty of his explanation touched Mariah deeply. This wasn't charity or misplaced gallantry. It was a man trying to right a wrong that could never truly be corrected. "I'm grateful," she said simply. "Emma and I both are." Jacob nodded, a small smile touching his weathered face. "Little Emma, is it? Pretty name." "After my mother," Mariah explained, stroking her daughter's downy hair. "Thomas and I chose it together before he left for the mines." "How long ago was that?" 15 months. "We got word of the accident 3 months after he departed." Mariah stared at the distant mountains, purple now in the fading light. "By then I was already showing. The gossips did the rest." Jacob's expression hardened. "People are quick to believe the worst." "Yes," Mariah agreed softly. "They are." As the sun sank lower, the heat of the day began to dissipate. Jacob pointed out landmarks as they traveled, ancient saguaros standing like sentinels, a rock formation that resembled a sleeping giant, a dry creek bed that would become a raging torrent during the monsoon season. His deep voice was soothing, and Mariah found herself relaxing despite the uncertainty of her situation. When they finally turned off the main trail onto a narrower path, Mariah caught her first glimpse of Jacob's ranch. A modest adobe house sat nestled against the foothills, flanked by several outbuildings and corrals. It wasn't large, but it was well maintained, with a small garden plot visible to one side. "Welcome to Sycamore Creek Ranch," Jacob said, a note of pride in his voice. "Named for the trees along the creek that runs through the back of the property. It's one of the few year-round water sources in these parts." "It's lovely," Mariah said sincerely. As they approached, a door opened and an older Mexican woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're late, Señor Jacob," she called. "Dinner is—" She stopped short when she saw Mariah and Emma. "Quién es esta? Doña Elena, this is Mrs. Mariah Kennedy and her daughter Emma," Jacob explained as he brought the wagon to a halt. "They'll be staying with us for a while. Mrs. Kennedy, this is Elena Vasquez, my housekeeper and the finest cook in the Arizona Territory." Elena's sharp eyes took in Mariah's worn dress, the sleeping baby and the small carpetbag. Understanding dawned in her weathered face. "The town?" she asked Jacob quietly. He nodded. Without another word, Elena came forward. "Come inside, Señora. You must be tired and hungry. I will show you where you can freshen up, and then we will eat." The simple kindness after a day of cruelty nearly undid Mariah. She blinked rapidly as Jacob helped her down from the wagon, careful not to disturb Emma. "Thank you," she managed. Elena led her into the house, which was surprisingly cool after the heat outside. The main room was simply furnished but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, a solid wooden table with chairs, and a few well-worn armchairs. Shelves lined one wall, filled with books more than Mariah had seen outside of a proper library. "You like books?" Elena asked, noticing Mariah's gaze. "Very much. My father was a schoolteacher before his health failed." Elena nodded approvingly. "Señor Jacob reads every night. Now come, your room is this way." The bedroom was small but clean, with a bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with pitcher and basin, and a rocking chair by the window. A wooden cradle stood in one corner. "The cradle was for Señor Jacob's sister," Elena explained softly. "He kept it, though." She crossed herself quickly. "It is good, it will have use now." Mariah gently laid Emma in the cradle, the baby stirring only slightly before settling again. She straightened and found herself suddenly overwhelmed. The events of the day crashed over her like a wave, and she swayed on her feet. Elena's strong hand caught her elbow. "Sit, Señora. Rest a moment. I will bring water." When the older woman left, Mariah sank onto the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry silent tears that coursed down her cheeks and dripped onto her clasped hands. She had lost everything today, and yet through some miracle, she and Emma weren't alone in the desert. They had shelter, food, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. By the time Elena returned with a pitcher of water and a clean cloth, Mariah had composed herself. She washed her face and hands and changed Emma's wrappings, grateful for the privacy. "Come," Elena said when they were ready. "Food is on the table, and Señor Jacob is waiting." Dinner was a simple but hearty stew with fresh bread and butter. Jacob had changed from his trail clothes and washed up, his dark hair still damp at the temples. He stood when Mariah entered with Emma in her arms. "I hope the room is suitable," he said. "More than suitable," Mariah assured him. "I can't thank you enough. No need for thanks." "Please, eat while it's hot." Alina took Emma so Mariah could eat, the older woman cooing softly to the baby in Spanish. For the first time that day, Mariah felt herself truly relax. The food was delicious, and Jacob kept the conversation light, telling her about the ranch and asking general questions about her interests. He carefully avoided mentioning Sierra Vista or the circumstances that had brought her to his home. After dinner, with Emma fed and settled in the cradle, Mariah joined Jacob on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. In the distance, coyotes called to one another, their eerie songs rising and falling on the cool breeze. "It's peaceful here," Mariah observed. Jacob nodded. "That's why I chose this place. After the war and years on cattle drives, I wanted quiet. You fought in the war, Union cavalry, saw too much, came west afterward to forget." He offered a small, wry smile. "Doesn't work that way, though. The memories follow." "Yes," Mariah agreed softly, "they do." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic creak of the porch swing soothing. "Mr. Quinn, Jacob, please." "Jacob," she corrected herself. "I need you to know that the rumors weren't true. Thomas was the only man I've ever been with. Emma is his daughter." "I never thought otherwise," Jacob said simply. "Then why help us? Most people believe the worst." Jacob considered this. "I've learned to trust my instincts about people. When I saw you standing there, holding your baby with your head high despite everything, I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were someone worth standing beside." The simple statement, delivered without artifice, touched something deep in Mariah's heart. She looked away, sudden tears threatening again. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered. "It's been a long time since anyone did." "Get some rest, Mariah," Jacob said gently. "Tomorrow's a new day." As she prepared for bed that night, Mariah gazed out the small window at the star-strewn sky. For the first time in months, perhaps longer, she felt a fragile hope blossoming. Whatever the future held, she and Emma weren't facing it alone. The next morning, Mariah woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the unfamiliar sound of roosters crowing. Emma was already awake, cooing softly in her cradle. For a disoriented moment, Mariah couldn't place where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She was at Sycamore Creek Ranch. She had been driven from Sierra Vista, and a man named Jacob Quinn had stood up for her when no one else would. After dressing herself and Emma, Mariah found the kitchen empty but warm, with coffee bubbling on the stove and fresh bread cooling on the table. A note in neat handwriting informed her that Alina had gone to gather eggs and Jacob was tending to the horses. Mariah poured herself coffee and settled Emma on her lap, savoring the quiet moment. Through the window, she could see the ranch coming to life in the morning light. Jacob emerged from the stable, leading a magnificent black horse. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, speaking softly to the animal as he led it to the corral. Alina returned with a basket of eggs, her wrinkled face breaking into a smile at the sight of Mariah and Emma. "Buenos dias, Senora. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Mariah admitted. "Good. Now you will eat, and then we will see about proper clothes for you and the Niña. Senor Jacob must go to town today for supplies. He said you can make a list of what you need." Mariah's cheeks warmed. "I couldn't possibly ask for more than he's already done." Alina waved away her protest. "He insists, and Senor Jacob is not a man one argues with, eh?" After breakfast, Mariah ventured outside with Emma, wanting to explore her temporary home in the daylight. The ranch was more impressive than it had seemed in the dusk of the previous evening. The main house was flanked by a stable, a barn, several corrals, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse, though it seemed unoccupied at present. She found Jacob mending a section of fence, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms bronzed by the sun. He looked up as she approached, a smile warming his features. "Good morning," he called. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you." She shifted Emma to her other hip. "Your ranch is beautiful." "It's coming along," Jacob said with modest pride. "Started with just the house and stable 5 years ago. Been adding to it bit by bit." "You manage it all yourself?" "I have a couple of hands who help with the cattle, but they are up in the high pastures right now with most of the herd. Won't be back for another week or so." He drove the last nail into the fence post and straightened. "Alina said she told you I'm heading to town. Is there anything specific you need?" Mariah hesitated, uncomfortable with the idea of accepting more charity. "We'll be fine with what we have." Jacob's expression grew serious. "Mariah, I understand your pride, but Emma needs proper supplies and you'll need more than what you could carry in that carpet bag. Please, let me help." His sincerity was disarming. "All right," she conceded, "but I insist on working to repay you. I can cook, clean, mend whatever needs doing." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Alina might have something to say about you taking over her kitchen, but we can always use an extra pair of hands around here. Deal, deal." Jacob reached out and gently touched Emma's cheek with one calloused finger. The baby grabbed it with surprising strength, bringing a full smile to Jacob's face. "Strong little lady," he observed, "just like her mama." The simple compliment warmed Mariah through. "Which town will you be visiting?" she asked. "Not Sierra Vista, I hope." "No," Jacob assured her. "I'm heading to Benson. It's smaller, but they have what we need. I should be back by sundown." After Jacob departed, Mariah spent the morning helping Alina with household chores. The older woman was a wealth of information about the ranch and, more interestingly, about Jacob. "He came here after the war with nothing but his horse and the clothes on his back," Alina told her as they hung laundry. "Worked at the Miller Ranch for 3 years, saved every penny, then bought this land when no one else wanted it because there was no easy water access. But he found water." Alina nodded. "He is a man who sees what others miss, found the underground spring that feeds the creek. Now he has one of the few properties with year-round water." She pinned a sheet to the line. "Many people have tried to buy this land from him since then. He always refuses." "It must mean a great deal to him." "It is his home," Alina said simply. "The first real home he has had since he was a boy." Mariah absorbed this information thoughtfully. "What about his family?" He mentioned a sister. Alina's face grew solemn. "Señorita Rebecca." She was younger, very beautiful. Her husband was not a good man, took her west, then abandoned her. Señor Jacob searched for her for almost a year. She shook her head sadly. "Found where she had died, but never found her baby." "How awful," Mariah murmured, instinctively holding Emma closer. "This is why he helped you," Alina said, her dark eyes knowing. "He could not save his sister, but perhaps he can help you." The rest of the day passed quickly. Mariah discovered she enjoyed the rhythm of ranch life. The physical work was satisfying after months of being treated like an invalid during her pregnancy, and after Emma's birth. By mid-afternoon, she had helped Alina prepare dinner, swept the house, and even weeded part of the vegetable garden, with Emma napping contentedly in a makeshift cradle of blankets in the shade. True to his word, Jacob returned as the sun was setting, the wagon loaded with supplies. Among them were several lengths of fabric for dresses, baby clothes for Emma, and practical items like soap, hair pins, and a sturdy pair of boots for Mariah. "You didn't have to do all this," she protested as they unpacked the wagon. "Consider it an investment in my ranch hand," Jacob replied with a wink. "Can't have you working in worn-out boots." Over dinner, Jacob shared news from town. The railroad was expanding, bringing more settlers to the territory. The Army had increased patrols after reports of Apache activity to the north. And most significantly for Mariah, he'd asked discreetly about opportunities for a widow with a young child. "The school teacher in Benson is leaving at the end of the month," he told her. "Heading back east to care for her ailing mother. The town council is looking for a replacement." Mariah's heart quickened. "A teaching position," Jacob nodded, sipping his coffee. "I mentioned you might be interested, given your father's background. They'd like to meet you next week if you're willing." Yes, of course. The possibility of meaningful work, of independence, was more than she dared hope for. "Thank you, Jacob, truly." He waved away her thanks. "You'd be doing them a favor." Not many qualified teachers eager to come to these parts. Later, after Emma was asleep and Alina had retired for the night, Mariah found Jacob on the porch again. He was cleaning a saddle, his hands working the leather with practiced ease. "May I join you?" she asked. He set aside the saddle. "Of course." Mariah settled into the chair beside him. "I wanted to thank you properly for everything today, the teaching opportunity especially." "You'll be excellent at it," Jacob said with quiet confidence. "I can tell. How, you barely know me," he considered this. "You have patience. I watched you with Emma today, and you speak well educated. Plus, you've faced adversity without letting it break your spirit. Those are qualities a teacher needs out here." His assessment was so matter-of-fact, so lacking in flattery, that Mariah knew he meant every word. It had been so long since someone had seen value in her beyond her role as wife or mother. "Tell me about your sister," she said softly. "Alina mentioned her today." A shadow crossed Jacob's face. Rebecca was luminous. That's the word that always comes to mind. Bright, full of life. He looked out into the darkness. "She was 6 years younger than me. By the time I returned from the war, she'd married a man named Harris. I didn't trust him, but she was in love." "What happened?" "He took her west, supposedly to start a ranch in California. I was working cattle drives, sending money when I could." His jaw tightened. "Found out later he abandoned her in a small town near Yuma. She was expecting by then. The town turned against her when they realized her husband wasn't coming back." Mariah's heart ached for the parallel to her own situation. "That's why you helped me." Jacob nodded slowly. "When I finally tracked her movements, I learned she'd died in childbirth on the trail to Tucson. Some travelers had buried her, but the baby—" He swallowed hard. "A family took the infant," they said. "No one knew who or where they'd gone." "I'm so sorry," Mariah whispered. "That baby would be almost 10 now." Jacob's voice was rough with emotion. "I still look for a child that age whenever I ride into a new town. Foolish, I know." Impulsively, Mariah reached out and covered his hand with hers. "Not foolish, human." His fingers turned, interlacing with hers in a gesture that felt both natural and startling. For a long moment they sat in silence, connected by shared understanding of loss. "It's getting late," Jacob finally said, though he made no move to release her hand. "You should rest." Reluctantly, Mariah withdrew her hand and stood. "Good night, Jacob." "Good night, Mariah." As she walked back to her room, Mariah was acutely aware of a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. It had been so long since she'd felt this connection to another person, this understanding that went beyond words. It both comforted and frightened her. Thomas had been gone just over a year. Was it disloyal to feel this stirring of interest in another man? And even if it wasn't, Jacob had offered her shelter out of kindness and memory of his sister. There was no indication he saw her as anything more than someone in need of help. Yet as she checked on the sleeping Emma, Mariah couldn't help but remember the feel of his rough hand against hers, the quiet intensity in his blue eyes when he spoke of his sister. the gentle way he'd touched Emma's cheek. There was a goodness in Jacob Quinn that drew her like a compass finding north. Whatever might or might not develop between them, she was grateful fate had brought them together. For the first time since Thomas's death, Mariah allowed herself to imagine a future filled with possibility rather than despair. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm at Sycamore Creek Ranch. Mariah helped Alina with household tasks in the mornings, then spent afternoons assisting Jacob with whatever needed doing, mending tack, sorting supplies, even learning to ride one of the gentler horses. Emma thrived in the clean air and peaceful surroundings, growing plumper and more alert each day. A week after her arrival, Jacob drove Mariah to Benson for her meeting with the town council. She wore one of the new dresses Alina had helped her sew, her hair neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet. Emma, dressed in a fresh gown, cooed contentedly in her arms. Benson was smaller than Sierra Vista, but seemed friendlier. No one stared accusingly as Jacob escorted Mariah to the town hall. The council members, 2 merchants, the town doctor, and a graying banker interviewed her thoroughly but respectfully, asking about her education and experience. "I assisted my father in his schoolhouse for several years before my marriage," Mariah explained, "and I've always maintained a love of learning." Dr. Reynolds, a kindly man with spectacles perched on his nose, smiled approvingly. "And your little one? Will you be able to manage teaching while caring for her?" "Emma is a good baby," Mariah replied, "and I'm not afraid of hard work." The council conferred briefly, then offered her the position starting the following month. The salary was modest but included lodging in the small house behind the schoolhouse. It was more than Mariah had dared hope for. "They were impressed with you," Jacob said as they drove back to the ranch. "As I knew they would be." Mariah couldn't stop smiling. "I can hardly believe it. A month ago I was barely getting by on seamstress work, and now I have a teaching position." "You earned it," Jacob said firmly. "Your father would be proud." The casual mention of her father touched Mariah. She'd mentioned him only briefly to Jacob, yet he'd remembered and understood what his approval would have meant to her. "Thank you for believing I could do this," she said softly. Jacob glanced at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm just glad Benson is gaining a fine teacher instead of Sierra Vista. Their loss." The mention of her former home brought a shadow to Mariah's happiness. "I wonder what they're saying now that I'm gone." "Does it matter?" "I suppose not," she admitted. "But it's hard to know people believe such terrible things about me." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "The truth has a way of coming out eventually, and you'll be building a new reputation in Benson, one based on who you really are." His confidence in her was both comforting and empowering. Mariah found herself watching him as he drove, noting the strength in his profile, the careful way he handled the horses, the occasional smile that transformed his serious face. In the 3 weeks that followed, Mariah threw herself into preparations for her new position. She reviewed the schoolbooks Jacob procured for her, planned lessons, and sewed additional clothing for herself and Emma. In the evenings, she often joined Jacob on the porch, where they would talk long into the night about books, ideas, their pasts, and their hopes. She learned that Jacob had grown up in Ohio, the son of a blacksmith, that he joined the Union Army at 18 and served through the entirety of the war, that he'd come west seeking peace and found it in the solitude of the Arizona Territory. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Missouri, her father's dedication to education despite failing health, her mother's gentle wisdom. She spoke of meeting Thomas at a church social, their quiet wedding, and the dreams they'd shared before his death. "I loved him," she said one evening as they watched a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "He was a good man, Kind, hardworking. I'm sure he was, Jacob replied. He must have been to win your heart. There was something in his voice that made Mariah look at him sharply, but his expression gave nothing away as he gazed at the horizon. As the day of her departure for Benson approached, Mariah found herself increasingly torn. She was eager to begin her new life, to provide for Emma through her own efforts. Yet the thought of leaving Sycamore Creek Ranch, of leaving Jacob and Alina, filled her with unexpected sadness. 2 nights before she was to leave, Jacob's ranch hands returned from the high pastures with the cattle. They were rough men but respectful, tipping their hats to Mariah and admiring Emma from a distance. That evening, Alina prepared a feast to celebrate the successful cattle drive, and for the first time, the ranch house was filled with laughter and conversation. After dinner, as the hands retired to the bunkhouse and Alina cleared the table, Jacob asked Mariah if she would walk with him to the creek. The night was warm, the moon nearly full, casting silver light over the landscape. "I've been meaning to show you where the ranch got its name," Jacob said as they followed a well-worn path behind the house. Emma was sleeping soundly back in her cradle, Alina having assured Mariah she would listen for any cries. The creek was larger than Mariah had imagined, a clear stream running between banks lined with massive sycamore trees, their pale trunks ghostly in the moonlight. The sound of flowing water and rustling leaves created a peaceful symphony. "It's beautiful," Mariah breathed, tilting her head back to gaze up at the towering trees. "My favorite place on the ranch," Jacob admitted. He led her to a flat boulder beside the water where they sat side by side, shoulders almost touching. "I come here to think. And what do you think about?" Mariah asked, suddenly aware of how alone they were, how close. Jacob was silent for a long moment. "Lately, about how quiet the house will be after you and Emma leave." The simple admission sent Mariah's heart racing. "We've only been here a short time, long enough to make a difference." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Mariah, I know you're set on Benson, and I respect that. You need to stand on your own feet, I understand that better than most. But I want you to know that there's a place for you here, for both of you. Always." "Jacob, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that these weeks with you and Emma have been the happiest I've known in years. The ranch feels like a home again, not just a place where I work and sleep." Mariah's throat tightened with emotion. "You've done so much for us already." "It's not about what I've done," Jacob said, his voice low and intense. "It's about what you've brought back into my life, purpose, joy," he hesitated. "Hope." The word hung between them, charged with meaning. Mariah found herself unable to look away from his eyes, which reflected the moonlight like still pools. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Jacob smiled slightly. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know before you left." He stood and offered his hand to help her up. When she placed her fingers in his, he didn't immediately let go. Instead, he drew her slightly closer. "May I write to you in Benson?" he asked. "I'd like that very much." They walked back to the house in a silence that vibrated with unspoken feelings. At her bedroom door, Jacob paused. "Good night, Mariah." "Good night, Jacob." She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her heart pounding. What was happening between them? Was it merely gratitude she felt, or something deeper? And did she have the courage to find out? The day of departure dawned clear and bright. Jacob had insisted on driving Mariah and Emma to Benson himself, helping load her few possessions into the wagon. Alina hugged her fiercely, pressing a package of food for the journey into her hands and whispering Spanish blessings over Emma. The journey passed too quickly. They spoke of practical matters: the route to Benson, the location of the schoolhouse, when the term would begin. Neither mentioned their conversation by the creek, though it hung in the air between them, unacknowledged but ever-present. The schoolhouse was a simple wooden building with large windows to catch the breeze. The teachers' quarters behind it were modest but clean, one main room with a small bedroom off to the side, a stone fireplace, and basic furnishings. Dr. Reynolds met them there with the key and a warm welcome. "We're delighted to have you, Mrs. Kennedy," he said. "The children have been without formal instruction for too long." "I'm eager to begin," Mariah replied with genuine enthusiasm. After the doctor departed, Jacob brought in her trunk and carpetbag. He moved slowly, as if reluctant to complete the task that would mark the end of their time together. "Will you stay for dinner?" Mariah asked impulsively. "I could prepare something." Jacob shook his head regretfully. "I should get back before dark." "The ranch hands are good men, but they need supervision." "Of course." Mariah tried to hide her disappointment. "Thank you for everything, Jacob. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "Be happy," he said simply. "That's repayment enough." He knelt to say goodbye to Emma, who was awake in her cradle. The baby grabbed at his finger, bringing a smile to his face. "You be good for your mama, little one," he murmured. "She's the bravest lady I know." When he straightened, his eyes met Mariah's with such intensity that she caught her breath. "I'll write," he promised. "I'll be waiting." And then he was gone, the sound of the wagon fading as he drove away. Mariah stood in the doorway until she could no longer see him, Emma cradled against her chest. "Well, little one," she whispered to her daughter, "this is our new home, just the two of us again." But even as she said it, Mariah knew something had changed. She was no longer the desperate widow cast out by her community. She was a woman with purpose, with hope, and with the memory of blue eyes that had looked at her with respect, admiration, and perhaps something more. The first letter arrived a week later, just as Mariah was settling into her new routine. Jacob's handwriting was neat and precise, his words thoughtful as he described happenings at the ranch, asked about her preparations for teaching, and conveyed Alina's concern that Emma might not be getting proper meals without her cooking. Mariah wrote back that same evening, describing the schoolhouse, the curious children who had already come by to meet the new teacher, and assuring him that she and Emma were well. She hesitated over how to close the letter, finally settling on with "warm regards," though the phrase seemed inadequate to express her feelings. They established a correspondence that sustained Mariah through the challenges of her first weeks of teaching. Jacob wrote every Sunday without fail, and Mariah responded as promptly as her duties allowed. Through his letters, she felt connected to Sycamore Creek Ranch and to the man who had changed her life with a simple act of kindness. The school term began with 28 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying. Mariah found she had a natural gift for teaching, able to engage even the most reluctant learners and maintain discipline without harshness. The parents in Benson quickly came to respect the new schoolteacher, and invitations to Sunday dinners became common. Emma thrived as well, doted on by the townspeople and particularly by Mrs. Reynolds, the doctor's wife, who often watched her during school hours. At 6 months, she was beginning to sit up on her own, her sunny personality winning hearts throughout Benson. Only in the quiet evenings when Emma was asleep and the lesson plans complete did Mariah allow herself to acknowledge the emptiness she felt. She missed the conversations with Jacob on the porch, the sound of his boots on the wooden floor, the way his rare laugh transformed his face. She missed Alina's motherly fussing and Spanish lullabies. She missed feeling part of something larger than herself. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures to the desert, Jacob's letters began to hint at changes at the ranch. He'd purchased additional acreage, expanded the garden, and added rooms to the main house. "Planning for the future," he wrote, without elaboration on what that future might hold. In late September, a letter arrived that was different from the others. The handwriting seemed hurried, the tone more personal. "Mariah," Jacob wrote, dispensing with his usual formal greeting, "I find myself unable to wait until Christmas to see you again, as we had discussed. Business requires my presence in Tucson next week, and I would very much like to stop in Benson on my return journey. If this would be inconvenient, please send word with the stage driver, and I will understand. If I do not hear from you, I will plan to arrive on Thursday afternoon. I trust you and Emma are well. The ranch is not the same without you. Yours, Jacob." The signature, "yours," made Mariah's heart beat faster. She read and reread the letter until the paper grew soft from handling. There was no question of sending word to prevent his visit. The thought of seeing Jacob again filled her with joy and nervous anticipation. Thursday couldn't come quickly enough. Mariah found herself distracted during lessons, glancing frequently at the window that faced the road from Tucson. When school finally dismissed, she hurried home to change into her best dress, a deep blue that Alina had insisted brought out her eyes, and arranged her hair with special care. "We're going to have a visitor, Emma," she told her daughter as she straightened the small house. "A very special friend." The sound of a horse's hooves outside sent her heart racing. She smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Jacob stood on the small porch, hat in hand, looking both familiar and somehow different. Perhaps it was the new shirt, or the neatly trimmed beard, or simply that she was seeing him through eyes that had missed him desperately. "Mariah," he said, his voice warm with pleasure, "you look well." "As do you," she replied, suddenly shy. "Please come in." He stepped inside, his tall frame making the small room seem even smaller. His eyes immediately sought out Emma, who was sitting on a blanket, playing with wooden blocks. "She's grown so much," he marveled, kneeling to greet the baby. Emma looked up with interest at the new arrival, offering a toothless smile that made Jacob laugh. "She remembers me. Or perhaps she just likes handsome men," Mariah said lightly, then blushed at her own boldness. Jacob's eyes met hers, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I've missed you, Mariah, both of you." The simple honesty of his statement broke through any awkwardness. "We've missed you too, very much." They talked for hours as the afternoon faded into evening. Jacob spoke of his business in Tucson, selling cattle and purchasing equipment for the ranch. Mariah told him about her students and the community of Benson. They shared a simple meal, and Jacob entertained Emma until she fell asleep, clearly exhausted from the excitement. As Mariah tucked her daughter into the cradle, a thought occurred to her. "Where are you staying tonight?" Jacob looked slightly embarrassed. "I hadn't thought that far ahead, to be honest. I suppose there's a hotel in town, one room above the saloon," Mariah confirmed. "Not the most restful accommodations." She hesitated, then added, "You're welcome to sleep here. On the floor, I mean. I have extra blankets. I wouldn't want to impose." "It's not an imposition," she assured him. "Not after everything you've done for us." Jacob accepted with quiet gratitude, and Mariah arranged a pallet for him near the fireplace. As they sat together in the lamplight after the preparations were complete, a comfortable silence fell between them. "Your letters have meant a great deal to me," Mariah said finally. "They've made me feel less alone." "I've kept all of yours," Jacob admitted. "Read them so often I nearly know them by heart." The confession brought a flush to Mariah's cheeks. "Jacob, he leaned forward slightly. Yes, words failed her. How could she explain the complexity of her feelings? The gratitude that had evolved into respect, into friendship, into something deeper she barely dared name. Jacob seemed to understand her struggle. "It's all right, Mariah. We have time." The following morning, after a breakfast shared in companionable conversation, Jacob reluctantly prepared to depart. "The ranch hands will wonder if I've been waylaid by bandits," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. At the door, he paused. "Mariah, I've been thinking. Would you and Emma consider spending Christmas at the ranch? Alina would be overjoyed and—" He hesitated. "So would I." "We'd love to," Mariah replied without hesitation. "School breaks for 2 weeks at Christmas." Relief and happiness washed over Jacob's face. "I'll come for you then. The 3rd week of December, we'll be ready." He reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. For a moment, Mariah thought he might say more, might even kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her fingers gently and released them. "Until Christmas, then." "Until Christmas," she echoed. As she watched him ride away, Mariah felt both disappointment and anticipation. Something was building between them, something neither was quite ready to name, but that grew stronger with each meeting, each letter. Christmas would bring them together again, and perhaps then they would find the words for what they were becoming to each other. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a flurry of activity. Mariah organized a school pageant, helped decorate the town's small church, and continued her correspondence with Jacob. His letters grew more frequent as December approached, each one revealing a little more of his feelings, though never explicitly stating them. "The house seems to be waiting for your return," he wrote in early December. "Alina has been cleaning for days, though the place is already spotless. I find myself counting the days until I can bring you and Emma home for Christmas. Home, that word has taken on new meaning since I met you." When Jacob arrived to collect them on the appointed day, Mariah was ready. The term had ended successfully, with even the most challenging students showing improvement. Emma, now nearly 9 months old, was pulling herself up to stand and babbling constantly, her personality growing more distinct each day. The journey to Sycamore Creek Ranch was filled with comfortable conversation and shared laughter. Emma, fascinated by Jacob, kept reaching for him from Mariah's lap until he finally took the reins in one hand and held the baby with the other, much to Mariah's amusement. "She's determined to drive," Jacob observed as Emma grabbed at the leather straps. "She's determined about everything," Mariah replied fondly. "I'm afraid she's inherited my stubborn streak." "Good," Jacob said with conviction. "The world needs more determined women." The simple statement, delivered without artifice, warmed Mariah through. Jacob had a way of saying exactly the right thing, of seeing value where others might see fault. Arriving at the ranch was like coming home after a long journey. Alina rushed out to greet them, enveloping Mariah in a fierce hug before snatching Emma from her arms and covering the baby with kisses. The house smelled of pine boughs and spiced cider, festive touches visible in every room. "We have prepared your room," Alina announced, leading Mariah inside. "And the cradle is waiting for La Niña." Mariah followed her to the familiar bedroom but stopped short in the doorway. The room had been transformed. A new quilt covered the bed, curtains hung at the window, and a small writing desk sat in one corner. Most surprising of all, a bookshelf lined one wall, filled with volumes both familiar and new. "Jacob," she breathed, turning to find him watching her reaction from the doorway. I don't know what to say." "Alina insisted you needed a proper room," he said, though his eyes told her it had been his doing. "And I thought you might enjoy some books during your stay." "It's perfect," Mariah managed, blinking back sudden tears. No one had taken such care for her comfort since her parents died. The thoughtfulness of the gesture moved her deeply. The Christmas season at Sycamore Creek Ranch was everything Mariah could have wished for. Days were filled with baking, decorating, and preparing for the holiday. Evenings found them gathered around the fireplace, sharing stories and songs. Jacob read A Christmas Carol aloud over several nights, his deep voice bringing Dickens's characters to life. Emma thrived in the attention, particularly Jacob's. He fashioned a small wooden horse for her, carved with the same careful hands that managed cattle and repaired fences. The baby's delight in the simple toy brought a softness to his face that made Mariah's heart ache with tenderness. On Christmas Eve, after a festive dinner and the exchange of modest gifts, Alina retired early, leaving Mariah and Jacob alone by the fire. Emma had already been put to bed, exhausted from the day's excitement. "I have something for you," Jacob said, reaching into his pocket. "Something I wanted to give you privately." He handed her a small box tied with a simple ribbon. Mariah opened it carefully to find a delicate silver locket on a chain. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Open it," Jacob urged softly. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of Emma, her baby face captured in surprising detail. "How did you?" "There was a photographer in Tucson when I went on business," Jacob explained. "I had him make it from a sketch I drew." "It's not perfect, but it's perfect," Mariah interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. "Absolutely perfect. Would you help me put it on?" Jacob moved behind her, his fingers brushing her neck as he fastened the clasp. The simple touch sent a shiver down her spine. When he returned to sit beside her, he was closer than before, their shoulders almost touching. "Mariah," he began, his voice lower than usual, "these past months of knowing you, of writing to you, of thinking about you, they've changed me." Her heart quickened. "Changed you how?" "Before I met you, I was existing, not living, taking care of the ranch, doing what needed to be done, but without real purpose." He turned to face her fully. "You and Emma brought life back to this place, back to me." Mariah could hardly breathe. "Jacob, let me finish," he said gently. "I know it hasn't been long since Thomas. I know you came to Benson to stand on your own, to build a life for yourself and Emma. I respect that more than I can say." He took a deep breath. "But I find myself hoping that someday, when you're ready, you might consider making your home here, with me." The words hung in the air between them, both a question and a declaration. Mariah touched the locket at her throat, emotion making speech difficult. "I don't expect an answer now," Jacob continued. "I just wanted you to know how I feel, that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." Mariah found her voice at last. "Jacob Quinn, you are the most honorable, kind-hearted man I have ever known. When you found me in Sierra Vista, I was at my lowest point. You didn't just offer shelter, you offered respect when no one else would." "Anyone would have." "No," she interrupted firmly. "Not anyone, only you." She reached for his hand. "These months in Benson have been important. I needed to prove to myself that I could provide for Emma, that I could stand alone. But the truth is, I've missed you every single day." Hope kindled in Jacob's eyes. "You have?" "Yes," Mariah admitted, her cheeks warming. "Your letters were my lifeline. I found myself reading them again and again, hearing your voice in the words." She took a steadying breath. "I'm not sure I'm ready for promises yet, but I do know that when I think of home, I think of this place. Of you." Jacob's hand tightened around hers. "That's enough for now," he said softly. "More than enough." Slowly, giving her every chance to draw away, he leaned forward. Mariah met him halfway, her eyes closing as their lips touched in a kiss so gentle it was almost reverent. Jacob's hand came up to cup her cheek, and Mariah allowed herself to lean into his strength, into the promise of his embrace. When they finally parted, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Mariah," he whispered. "Merry Christmas, Jacob." They remained by the fire until the logs burned low, talking softly of small things and large, of Emma's growing personality, of Jacob's plans for the ranch, of books they loved and places they'd seen. The future lay before them, unwritten but full of possibility. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the desert landscape touched with frost that glittered in the early light. Mariah woke to Emma's babbling and the scent of coffee and pine. The events of the previous evening rushed back, bringing a smile to her face and a warmth to her heart that had nothing to do with the season. The day passed in a happy blur of celebration. Alina prepared a feast that would have fed twice their number. Jacob played with Emma, his deep laugh mixing with her baby giggles to create a symphony of joy that filled the house. And throughout it all, Mariah caught Jacob watching her with a tenderness that made her breath catch. The week between Christmas and New Year passed too quickly. Mariah found herself dreading the return to Benson, to the quiet rooms above the schoolhouse where only Emma would greet her in the evenings. On their final night at the ranch, Jacob suggested a walk to the creek. The night was cold but clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. They walked in comfortable silence, Jacob's hand warm around hers. At the creek, now barely a trickle in the winter months, they sat on the same boulder where they had talked months before. Jacob wrapped a blanket around Mariah's shoulders, his arm remaining to hold her close against the chill. "I've been thinking," Jacob said after a while, his voice thoughtful in the darkness, "about your teaching position." "Oh," Mariah shifted slightly to see his face. "I was wondering if you might consider teaching here at the ranch. There are several families within riding distance whose children have no formal education, and as the territory grows, more will come." Mariah considered this. "You mean start a school?" Jacob nodded, his enthusiasm growing. "There's a building near the main house that could be converted. It was meant to be a storehouse, but we've never needed it. With some work, it could make a fine schoolhouse." He paused. "You could continue the work you love, Emma would have a stable home and, Mariah prompted softly. "And I wouldn't have to miss you so terribly when you leave," he finished simply. The honesty of his admission touched her deeply. "It's a wonderful idea, Jacob, but what about my commitment to Benson? The term ends in May, doesn't it? Perhaps by then we could have the schoolhouse ready." His arm tightened slightly around her. "I don't want to rush you, Mariah. I just want you to know that there's a place for you here, a life if you want it." Mariah leaned her head against his shoulder, considering the proposal. Teaching at the ranch would allow her to maintain her independence while building something meaningful, and it would mean being near Jacob, watching their relationship grow at its own pace. "I'd like to think about it," she said finally. "But I'm interested." Jacob pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's all I ask." As they walked back to the house, hand in hand beneath the winter stars, Mariah felt a sense of rightness, of coming full circle. From the moment Jacob had taken her arm in Sierra Vista and said those two simple words, not alone her life had been changing, healing, growing towards something new and unexpected. The parting the next day was difficult but lacked the finality of their previous separation. Jacob would visit Benson in February, and they would continue their correspondence until then. Plans for the ranch schoolhouse were already taking shape in both their minds. As Jacob helped Mariah into the wagon for the journey back to Benson, Emma secured in her lap, he paused. "I almost forgot," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I have something for you." He handed her a small key. "To the ranch house, so you'll know you can always come home." Home, the word echoed in Mariah's heart as they traveled toward Benson. Perhaps home wasn't a place at all, but the feeling of being valued, respected, cherished. The feeling Jacob gave her with every letter, every glance, every touch. The spring term in Benson passed in a flurry of activity. Mariah threw herself into her teaching with renewed enthusiasm, determined to leave her students well prepared before her departure. Jacob visited monthly, each time bringing updates on the progress of the ranch schoolhouse and spending precious hours with Mariah and Emma. During his April visit, as they walked through Benson after Sunday services, Jacob broached a subject that had been on both their minds. "Mariah," he began carefully, "I know we've discussed you coming to teach at the ranch, but there's something else I need to ask." He stopped walking, turning to face her. Emma, now a year old and taking tentative steps, clung to her mother's skirt. "What is it?" Mariah asked, her heart quickening at his serious expression. Jacob took both her hands in his. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since that day in Sierra Vista when you stood with your head high despite everything. I've tried to be patient, to give you time and space, but I find myself unable to wait any longer to tell you how I feel." Tears welled in Mariah's eyes. "Jacob, please, let me finish." He squeezed her hands gently. "I don't just want you to teach at the ranch. I want you to be my wife. I want to be a father to Emma. I want us to be a family." He paused, vulnerability clear in his expression. "If you need more time, I understand, but I wanted you to know exactly what's in my heart." Mariah blinked back tears of joy. "I don't need more time, Jacob. I've known for months that I love you. I was just afraid to say it first, afraid it might be too soon after Thomas. And now I know that loving you doesn't diminish what I had with Thomas. It honors it." She smiled through her tears. "Thomas would want Emma and me to be happy, to be loved, and you make us both so very happy." Jacob's face transformed with joy. He lifted Mariah's hands to his lips, kissing them reverently. "Is that a yes, then?" "Yes," Mariah laughed, the sound bright with happiness. "Yes, I will marry you, Jacob Quinn." Emma, sensing the joy of the moment, reached up toward Jacob with a demanding up that made them both laugh. Jacob scooped her into his arms, and the little girl patted his face with chubby hands, clearly approving of this new arrangement. They were married in May in a simple ceremony in the Benson church. Dr. and Mrs. Reynolds stood up with them, and Alina made the journey from the ranch, her dark eyes shining with happiness as she watched the couple exchange vows. Emma, dressed in a new white dress, sat contentedly in Alina's lap throughout the service, occasionally calling out "Mama" or "Jake," to the amusement of the small congregation. After a brief honeymoon in Tux and Emma staying with the delighted Alina, they returned to Sycamore Creek Ranch. The ranch hands had decorated the house with wildflowers and strung a banner across the porch that read, "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn." Jacob carried Mariah across the threshold, Emma toddling in behind them with Alina's help. The house that had once seemed merely comfortable now felt truly like home, filled with love and the promise of a future together. The ranch schoolhouse opened that September with 12 students ranging from 6 to 14 years of age. Mariah taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history with the same passion she had brought to Benson, but now with the added joy of returning each afternoon to her husband and daughter. Emma thrived in the ranch environment, following Jacob around whenever possible, helping Alina in the kitchen, and charming the ranch hands with her increasing vocabulary and sunny disposition. She called Jacob Papa now, the word coming as naturally to her as breathing. In the spring of 1876, as wildflowers carpeted the desert in a riot of color, Mariah shared news that brought tears to Jacob's eyes. They would welcome another child in the fall. Their son, Thomas Jacob Quinn, was born on a crisp October morning, his lusty cries announcing his arrival to the waiting household. As Jacob held his son for the first time, wonder spread across his face. "He's perfect," he whispered, looking from the baby to Mariah with eyes full of love. "Just like his mother." And strong like his father, Mariah added softly, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. Emma, now 2.5, peered curiously at her baby brother. "My baby," she announced firmly, laying a protective hand on his blanket. "Yes, little one," Jacob agreed with a smile. "Our baby, our family." In the years that followed, Sycamore Creek Ranch prospered along with the Quinn family. The schoolhouse expanded to accommodate more students as settlers arrived in the territory. Jacob added to the ranch holdings, raising fine horses along with cattle. Emma grew into a bright, determined young woman with her mother's compassion and her father's sense of justice. Thomas, called TJ by the ranch hands, inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's love of books. And in 1879, they welcomed a daughter they named Rebecca Elena, for the sister Jacob had lost, and the woman who had become like a mother to them all. On a warm evening in the summer of 1885, Jacob and Mariah sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard. 11 years had passed since that fateful day in Sierra Vista when a desperate widow and her infant daughter had found an unexpected champion. "You ever think about it?" Jacob asked, his hand finding Mariah's as naturally as breathing. "About Sierra Vista," Mariah considered this. "Sometimes. Not with bitterness anymore, though. In a strange way, I'm almost grateful." "Grateful?" Jacob raised an eyebrow. "If they hadn't turned against me, I would never have met you." She squeezed his hand. "You wouldn't have taken my arm and said not alone." Jacob's face softened with memory and love. "Best words I ever spoke." "The words that changed everything," Mariah agreed. As the sun set over Sycamore Creek Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Mariah reflected on the journey that had brought her here from despair to hope, from isolation to belonging, from loss to love. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led to a life more fulfilling than she could have imagined on that terrible day when she'd stood alone against a town's judgment. Not alone. The promise Jacob had made that day had been kept in ways neither could have foreseen. Together, they had built a home, a family, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered.